Imagine a reality where the normal rules of society simply cannot reach you. By the late 1980s, Michael Jackson existed inside a fortress of celebrity, insulated by a level of wealth and media scrutiny that effectively cut him off from a conventional life. This fame provided the backdrop for a series of investigations that remain some of the most contested in American history. Despite a 2005 acquittal on all criminal charges, Jackson's private life left behind a record that continues to fuel an intense global debate. To understand how a man could be both legally cleared and perpetually suspected, we have to look at this timeline through two separate lenses: the strict rules of a courtroom and the behavioral patterns identified by modern science. The first formal move against Jackson occurred in 1993. Following a civil suit filed by a 13-year-old named Jordan Chandler, the LAPD and the FBI launched parallel investigations into the entertainer's relationships with minors. Law enforcement took aggressive, unprecedented steps to gather evidence. Jackson was forced to submit to a court-ordered strip search and forensic photography at Neverland Ranch, allowing investigators to compare his anatomy against explicit descriptions provided by the accuser. During these searches, investigators documented a specific way of life. Jackson frequently formed guarded and private friendships with young boys, hosting them for sleepovers and providing their families with significant gifts and international travel. But the criminal case stalled before it could reach a jury. Jackson paid a $23 million civil settlement to the Chandler family, and as a result, the primary accuser refused to testify in criminal court. This settlement created a permanent vacuum in the legal record. While Jackson maintained his presumption of innocence, the behavioral patterns that had alarmed investigators were never formally challenged or adjudicated in a criminal trial. 10 years later, the spotlight shifted back to Jackson's private life. A documentary by Martin Bashir showcased Jackson holding hands with a 13-year-old cancer survivor, Gavin Arvizo, and included admissions about their shared sleeping arrangements. These public statements triggered a massive response from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. 70 officers carried out a raid on Neverland Ranch, searching the estate for forensic evidence of misconduct. This led to a 4-month trial in 2005. Prosecutors presented 10 felony counts, attempting to prove that Jackson had used his estate to facilitate child molestation and a conspiracy to manage the accuser's family. However, the case lacked physical proof. The defense attacked the mother's credibility, highlighting her history of financial fraud, while FBI experts testified that 16 seized hard drives contained no illegal content. Because the prosecution could not establish a specific criminal act beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty on all 14 counts. The verdict provided legal finality, but the trial also placed concrete facts about Jackson's living environment into the public record. Investigators verified the existence of an alarm system on the hallway to Jackson's bedroom, as well as a secret closet in the master suite secured with 3 deadlocks. The defense did not deny these physical features, nor did they dispute the phone logs showing hundreds of calls to minors. Instead, they argued that Jackson's behavior was a product of his own traumatic childhood, rather than criminal intent. This demonstrates the fundamental divide in the case. A criminal conviction requires a definitive proof of act. On the other side of the scale, behavioral science identifies indicators like isolation and alarm systems. But for a jury, these smaller blocks rarely weigh enough to prove a felony. The defense effectively used this gap, showing that while a living environment may be concerning or inappropriate, it does not meet the legal standard for a conviction in the absence of a verified act. A not guilty verdict is a measure of the state's evidentiary burden. It does not provide a psychological explanation for the behavior, but rather confirms that the state failed to prove its case. Long after Jackson's death, new accusations emerged in the documentary Leaving Neverland. 2 men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, brought forward graphic and specific accounts of abuse they claimed to have suffered as children. This created a new paradox. Wade Robson had previously testified for Jackson's defense in 2005, stating under oath that no abuse had occurred. A decade later, he reversed this position entirely. Behavioral science explains this reversal through the concept of delayed disclosure. Trauma can trigger dissociation, a survival mechanism where a victim psychologically normalizes the abuse, leading them to protect the abuser until the trauma is processed much later in life. This psychological pattern is often at odds with the legal system. Courts require consistent, immediate testimony, whereas trauma can produce accounts that shift over decades as memories are acknowledged. Evaluating these claims require looking past the inconsistencies a lawyer would target and examining the documented mechanics of power in these relationships. Clinical psychology defines grooming as a systematic process, a sequence of actions used to lower a child's defenses and gain the trust of their guardians. This process often begins by identifying families in vulnerable positions, dealing with instability or severe illness, and establishing trust through a constant influx of gifts, money, and personal attention. The physical evidence at Neverland Ranch, from the private bedroom suites to the early warning alarms, aligns with the final stages of this pattern, creating a secure environment of isolation and secrecy. The ultimate tension in this case is that a successful grooming process is designed to eliminate the very evidence the criminal justice system requires. Secrecy and psychological manipulation ensure that there are no witnesses and no physical proof. Jackson's legacy remains in a state of permanent ambiguity. It forces a choice between respecting the finality of a legal acquittal and observing the verified behavioral patterns that, in any other context, would be seen as a cause for grave alarm.